You know, when you hear the word yoga, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For most of us, it's probably physical postures, stretching, right? Well, what if I told you that's just scratching the surface? Today, we're going to go way beyond the mat to explore the original yoga. It's this ancient, super practical science for mastering our own minds. Let's dive into what's basically an instruction manual for our inner world. So let me ask you something. Does your mind ever feel, I don't know, like an unruly chariot? Imagine it's being pulled by 5 wild horses, and each one is just lunging off in a different direction. One horse gets distracted by a sound, another by something it sees, a third by some random thought or memory. If you've ever felt scattered, like you're being pulled in a million directions at once, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. And that feeling? That's the core problem Patanjali's science is built to solve. So who came up with all this? The architect of this whole system was an ancient sage named Patanjali. And his work, it's not some abstract philosophy that's just meant for debate. No way. What he did was create a set of direct, practical instructions. It's a clear step-by-step guide for anyone who wants to grab the reins of that wild chariot and finally steer their own course. All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start with what's going on inside our minds, that inner crisis. Then we'll talk about what yoga really is beyond the mat. We'll look at the mind's 5 main habits, how we actually perceive reality, and then the big one, the 2 keys to mastering it all. This stuff can literally shift your entire way of being. Okay, let's jump right into part 1, our mind's inner crisis. The fundamental problem that yoga is trying to solve is this conflict, right? It's a clash between the natural, orderly flow of the world and our own kind of chaotic, reactive minds. So, Patanjali points out that we all develop this thing he calls a reactive nature. And what does that mean? Well, instead of acting with real intention, we spend most of our lives just reacting. We react to what people say, to something we see on the news, to our own memories. It creates this constant mental static, And that static separates us from what's actually happening right in front of us. Think about it like this. On one side, you've got nature's activity. It's the calm, orderly work of the planet, right? The seasons change, plants grow. It all just works. But then, on the other side, you've got our reactive nature. And that's this chaotic state where we're just bouncing around, reacting to everything without any real choice. It's kind of like the difference between a powerful river flowing steadily to the sea and a puddle on the street getting splashed around by every single car that drives by. So, if that's the problem, then what's the solution? Well, that brings us to part 2, yoga beyond the mat. And this is where we're going to redefine yoga, not as a physical workout, but as a precise, almost scientific method for recalibrating your mind. And this quote right here is absolutely crucial. See, Patanjali's work isn't some dusty old philosophy book you're supposed to just read and think about. Nope. It's a manual. It basically says here's what to do. It's all practical. He's not interested in just describing the destination. He wants to give you the map and the keys to the car so you can get there yourself. And the core instruction, the whole point of the system is this, Citta Vṛtti Nirodhaḥ. Now, that's a mouthful, but it basically means suspending the mind's chatter. Think about it. It's all about creating a tiny little pause between something happening and how you react to it. Like a car cuts you off in traffic. Instead of that instant flash of anger, there's just a moment of space. And in that tiny pause, that's where you reclaim your power. You stop being a puppet on a string, and you start actually making conscious choices. But here's the thing. To quiet down all that mental activity, you first have to know what you're actually looking for, right? You got to map the territory. So in our 3rd section, we get into the diagnostic phase. We're going to identify the mind's 5 fundamental habits, or patterns. These are called the vrittis. Okay, so believe it or not, every single thought or reaction you have fits into one of these 5 boxes. First up is right measure. That's just seeing things exactly as they are. Simple enough. Then you have wrong measure. This is where we slap our own ideas onto things, like seeing a towel and immediately thinking, that's my towel. Third, there's imaginative measure, or imagination. This is when you take the right data but jump to a totally wrong conclusion. Number 4 is absence of measure, which is basically sleep or when your mind is just not engaged. And finally, number 5 is impression of measure, which is just memory. This is when we react to something that happened in the past, not what's happening now. Just being able to spot these patterns as they pop up, that's the first huge step to getting a handle on them. All right, so now we know the 5 habits of the mind, but what tools does our mind actually use to create these habits in the first place? That's what brings us to section 4. We're going to look at the 3 main tools we use to perceive and measure our reality. Fundamentally, we have 3 ways of knowing stuff. The first one is direct measure. That's the obvious one, what you see, hear, and touch with your own 5 senses. Then there's indirect measure, which is just inference or deduction. For example, you see a locked door and you infer that nobody's home. And the third is representative measure or authority. This is the stuff you learn from a trusted source, like a book, a teacher, or an expert. The thing is, we use these 3 tools all day, every day, but we're usually not even aware of which one we're using at any given moment. Okay, so we've mapped the mind, we know its habits and its tools. Now we get to the how-to. This is where the rubber meets the road. Section 5 is all about the 2 keys to mastery, the actual practical techniques Patanjali gives us to regain control of that chariot. And these 2 keys are abhyasa, which means practice, and vairagya, which means detachment. You can think of them like the 2 wings of a bird. You absolutely need both to get off the ground. Abhyasa is that repeated, conscious effort to just watch your mind at work, to observe your inner machine without judging it. And vairagya is detachment. It's about learning to be passive to all the noise coming from the outside world and your senses. And this is important. It's not about running away from the world. It's about not letting the world's chaos become your chaos. And this right here reveals a really profound truth about how we change. You can't just remove an old habit. It doesn't work that way. You can't just fight your reactive nature head on. Instead, you have to build a new, stronger habit to replace it. It's through that constant practice of self-observation, that abhyasa, that you build a new habit of awareness. And eventually, that new habit just gets stronger than the old one, the one of mindless reaction. So, what's the payoff? What happens when you actually put all of this into practice? Well, that brings us to our final section, the ultimate shift in consciousness. This is about going from being a receiver to becoming a transmitter. Think of it this way. Most of us, by default, live at what you could call the negative pole. We're like a radio receiver, just passively picking up whatever signals are flying through the air around us. We're a center of reception, just reacting to everything. The whole goal of this practice is to switch over to the positive pole, to become a transmitter. In that state, you become a center of awareness, and you're actively transmitting your own intentions, your own actions out into the world. You literally go from being a product of your environment to being an intentional force within it. You know, when you strip away all the science and the techniques, it really comes down to this one simple truth. This isn't some mystical, far-off state that only a few people can reach. It's a discipline. It's a practice. And the only real secret, if there is one, is that you just have to begin. You have to make the choice to start. And so, we end right back where we started, with that chariot. Look, the 5 wild horses of your senses, they're always going to be there. The world is always going to be full of distractions. That's a given. So the only real question left is this. Who is in control of your chariot? Are you just going to let yourself be dragged along for the ride, or are you ready to pick up the reins?